Hey YouTube, it's been a long time since I last posted. I think my last post was like 3.5 years ago. Not entirely sure, but I feel like a video has been long overdue. And recently, someone has asked me to make them a magic script, like a script that could throw a magic bullet, or sorry, a magic attack, or for example, like a fireball. And I decided that would be like a good idea to make into a video because lots of people ask for kind of stuff for that kind of stuff, and I figured it would be like good to make a tutorial on it. So, anyways, I have already created a place with script set up for Rojo, and I've set up my JSON files and blah 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 blah. If you didn't understand anything that I just said, don't worry. It's just like Rojo's just a program that allows you to uh create scripts through different programs such as Visual Studio Code, which I prefer much more than the code editor in Roblox. But it's the tutorial will still be the same even if you don't have any of these programs. So basically what you need is a local script within the starter player scripts and a server script within server script service. You can name them whatever you want. I'm just gonna name them Fireball server and Fireball client, but yeah. What else do you need? Yeah, I think that's about it. So for now, we're gonna start off with defining the local player. So game get service players dot local player. For those of you who don't know, the local player is basically the player that's running the local script. It's that's basically what it is. It's just local scripts. When a player joins into the game, local scripts are copied into the player so they can run on the player client. And the local player is just a reference to the client, which is essentially the player. And using the player, we can get the character, which is what we're gonna need for. Do we need player the character in the client? Um, no, you don't actually. Now that I think about it, you don't need the character, but I'm gonna explain it anyways. Basically, this just gets the character and stores inside of the character variable over here, which seems self-explanatory, but you may be confused what this or player.character added wait event does. This basically just waits for the character to be added and returns it and stores inside of the character variable if this is nil. The, you may be thinking there's no way that this could be nil because it's a reference to the character. Well, the thing is, local scripts they sometimes run before the character is added into the game. So if you were to check for the character immediately and the character style isn't loaded yet, it would obviously return nil. And that would be bad because that could break other code inside. It would cause your code to error if you use the variable anywhere else in your code. So it's recommended and good practice to use an OR operator over here to check to just wait until the character added event is fired. All right. Next, you're also gonna want to get oops, the mouse, the local player's mouse, and store it within a variable for later use. You're also that's Mosu mouse. You're also going to want to create a variable and initialize it as false. Just going to quickly clean this up. Services. So, god damn it. Alright, so the first service that you're going to want to get is the replicated storage. We're going to use the replicated storage to access remotes and to get an object that we can clone, but we're going to do that on the server. But for now, we're going to use this to create or to get a remote event. So fireball, oops, I had to define it over here. I don't know why, but yeah. Thanks, tab 9. Replicated storage, wait for child, fireball function, cool. And we're gonna, oh yeah, I forgot one thing. We need to define context action service. And we're going to need to create a new function. We could name this onKeyPress, for example, with the parameters action name, input state, and input objects. I'll explain these in a bit. Next, we're gonna want to bind an act. We're gonna want to call the bind action function from context action service, and provide around any kind of string onKeyPress, which is a reference to your function that you created. For me, it's onKeyPress, a bool that and your key code. So basically, what this does is what the first argument is, it's a string that represents the action name. You don't really need this since we're not going to be using it in the code, but you can have this set to whatever you want. But I'm just going to have it set to fireball. onKeyPress, as I said before, is a reference to the function, so we can bind a key or multiple keys to the action, so it can fire when you press them. This bool over here, the third argument, is a bool that determines whether Roblox will automatically create a button for mobile users so that they can also fire this function. Because context action service does not contain any the key code enum does not contain any mobile buttons because mobile devices don't have any keyboards. So if you set this to true, Roblox will automatically create a button for you that the mobile players can press instead of a key code. And the fourth argument is a tuple, which essentially means you can provide any number of arguments after this. You can set the key code to any value you want, ampersand, asterisk, E, A, B, whatever. You can also set it to like button A, which is an Xbox controller or PS4 controller. And you can also view it like an entire list if my Firefox would load. Key code. You can view an entire list of key codes over here. If you don't know what the name of the key code is that you want. And over here, bind action automatically passes the action name, which is this over here, the input state, which determines whether the player just started to press the button, whether the player let go of the button, whether the player changed their key press while they were holding the button, etc. I'm pretty sure you can check. So enum.user input state dot begin cancel change. Yep. Wait, actually. And the third argument is input objects. You can use this you don't really need this, but you can use it if you want. You can basically get the key code and stuff like that. It just returns an input object. Actually, here, I can just quickly show you what input object is. Yeah, input object contains a delta property, key code property, position property, user input state, user input type, blah, 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 blah. You guys can read up more on what those are on the API reference, which I have a link to in the description. User input state. See, begin, change, end. Yeah, and none. You can also have that. So now that you know what each argument does and what each parameter does, we're going to want to create a new if statement that checks if input state is equal to enum.userinputState.begin. And if fired is false. If both of these return true in the if statement, then we're going to set fire to true. The reason why we're setting fire to true is because this right here, we're going to use it as a debounce. A debounce is essentially a cooldown that uh, that we can use to limit the amount of times the player can use their magic. So for example, wait 2 fired equals false. Put fired magic. So if I were to test this, oh, oops, I forgot to create a remote function. My bad. Create a new remote function within replicated storage and call it whatever you want. I'm going to be calling mine fireball function. Make sure it's the same as what you have over here. Did I spell it right though? Cool. See, I'm spamming the E key, but it only fires the magic every 2 seconds because we have a debounce over here acting as a cooldown. To prove to you that I'm actually spamming it, I'll use the input object argument that I was talking about earlier. Parameter, I mean. See, I'm spamming it, but it's only firing the magic every 2 seconds. Or whatever you have specified. But we're not going to be doing this on the client side. We're going to do this stuff using the remote function. You can also use a remote event, but I find that a remote function is much better to use because on the server we're going to be using methods that can take a random number of time to finish. Um, yeah, sorry, I was just thinking about something. So next what we're going to want to do is set fired. Once those methods on the server are done, we're going to return false to show that the player can fire a new fireball or magic. So fired equals fireball function invoke server mouse.hit. Yep. So what this basically does is it invokes the server and calls a function on the server and returns whatever the return was in the function and stores inside of the fired variable. In this case, we're going to be returning false on the server and storing inside of the fired function, which we can use to reset the debounce. If you're using a remote event, you can instead use fire server. There's not really that big of a difference. It's just the method, the functions, and the events that you use are different. So next you want to go to the server and define some quick variables. So for example, local fireball damage equals 25. Oops. Local fireball cooldown equals 2. Local fireball max distance equals 300. Let's say something like that. And then services. For services, we're gonna want what do we want? We're gonna want replicate storage. Oh yeah, replicate storage. Oops. We're gonna want the player service. We're gonna want tween service, and then debris service. I like the descending order. Anyways, next what you want to do is have a reference to your remote function. So local fireball function and create a new function. Let's call it create fireball, I guess, and play. I have a reference to the player and mouse C-frame. We're also gonna call. We're gonna also connect the onServer invoke event to the fireball function and set it to the create fireball and set it to a reference to the create fireball function or whatever function that you created. This will basically, this is what receives the invoke server from the client and calls the function on the server. The reason why we have player as the first argument instead of mouse.hit is because player is automatically passed by onServer invoke and onServer event and will always be the first argument. The reason behind this is because the player cannot be accessed by the server. The server does not know what the player is, right? Because the server maintains multiple clients. There's no way to specify what the client you're trying to look at is without using without iterating over get players or indexing get players, or using the player added player removing functions using the player parameter. That's the player argument that's passed on to them. Also, the reason why we're passing mouse C-frame instead of just mouse is because the mouse only exists on the client. Same thing with what I said before about the player. The server does not know what player to use, so therefore it does not know what mouse to use, right? So you can't just be like, so you have to pass the properties instead because the mouse can only exist, my bad, on the client. You can also provide multiple more properties like mouse.target and just be like, oops, mouse target. Well, we don't need that right now. We don't need that at all, actually. Anyways, within the create fireball function, we're gonna create a clone of the fireball that we have stored, or that we're gonna have stored within replicate storage. But first we need to define some properties. So .cframe equals player.character get primary part cframe. Make sure to set it. And then we're gonna set the parent, not the parents, the parent of the clone to workspace. Alright, cool. So what this does is it clones the fireball clone object. Oops, I spelled it wrong. And it stores it within this variable. Then we set the C-frame of the cloned object to the primary part C-frame of the character, the player's character. The primary part is generally the humanoid root parts. So therefore, we're setting the C-frame of the clone to the humanoid root parts C-frame, and we're parenting it to the workspace so it can exist and not be known as nil by when we try to reference it using primary star, etc. Next we're gonna want to set the network ownership to nil, so we can have the server decide what client gets network ownership over the part. The reason why we do this is because if there's no specified network owner, like then it will look jittery to some clients. So we have the server decide what client gets network ownership instead, so it doesn't appear jittery for anyone. But just so I could show you the movements, because we're going to be using tweening and stuff like that, but just so I can show you how that looks without setting the network ownership so you understand the difference, I'm going to comment that out for now. Next, we're going to define a direction from direction vector from mouse C-frame dot position to dot position, the clone's position, and we're going to normalize it and multiply it by the max distance, fireball max distance variable that we defined up here. This gets the direction of here. Let's do this. All right, so let's assume we have a vector over here, which is this is the origin, and the target's over here, and the mouse is over here. The ray, sorry, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be casting a ray from the origin, which is this vector over here, in the direction of the mouse. Okay, so it will just continuously moving forward until it collides with an object. But let's say the mouse is over here. It's going to move forward into the direction of the mouse, but it's actually going to stop over here because because the ray collides with the target, and then returns the target, that the object that was hit, in a variable, and we can use that to determine whether what we collided with is a player or not. So to show you what I mean, local hit position equals workspace, find part array with ignore list, ray dot new origin, which is the firewall clone dot position, capitalized P, and direction. So that's basically what I showed over here. And then we're gonna specify an ignore list, and we're only gonna ignore the character so we don't damage ourselves. You can specify any amount of objects in within the table, but I'm just gonna have it as that for now. And we're gonna set this to true and set this to false. These arguments over here, their default values are false, so we don't necessarily have to set them, but they're basically like extra optional parameters that you may want to define. But since we don't have any terrain or water inside of the place, because it's an empty place, and the third and fourth arguments have to do with terrain and water collision detection, I'm just going to leave them as is. Find part array with ignore list, or any kind of find part array, when it collides with an object as shown over here, this object over here, it returns the object that was hit into the first variable over here, because it returns a tuple. And I'm pretty sure there's only three arguments that are there's only three values that were returned within the tuple: hit, position, and normal. But we're not going to use normal, so that's why I'm just going to leave it out like this. We only want hit and position for now. Next, we're going to want to define a target variable that checks if an object was hit, and if the so basically what we're going to do is we're going to check if there was an actual object that was hit, and we're going to check if the ancestor of the object that was hit has a model, and if there is a model, then we're going to check if that model is the character, and if that character has a player linked to it. And therefore we can just do some ternary operator magic like this. Copy this, paste this here, or hit. Basically, and then we can get the character model like this. Basically what's happening over here is the object is getting hit, and you're checking whether one of the ancestors of the object that was hit is a model, because a character, let's say the ray hit this hair, my bombastic hair, it would hit the handle, but what's hit the parent? Bombastic hair, the accessory, not a model. The reason why I didn't do hit dot parent find first child humanoid, which is what people usually do, is because this is not a model. This would error even though it hit the player. So you check if this is a model, and if it's not, then you move to the next parent, which is the ancestor in this case. This is a model, however, so it will return this model. Then we're going to check if the model is indeed a player. And since it is, the function will be like, oh, cool, this is a player. I'm going to return this value. I'm going to return true now. This entire evaluation will return true, and it will evaluate to this part of the ternary operator. And it will return the character model and store it within the target variable. If any of these two were were to return false or nil, then the ternary operator will evaluate to the or instead of the and. And well, it would evaluate to the and, but then it would evaluate to sorry, no, it won't evaluate to the and. It will evaluate to the or immediately because of something called short circuit evaluation. I think that's what it's called. I just know that it has short circuit in the name. But essentially what it is let's say this is true in this sorry, let's say this is false. This won't be checked because this is false because we have an AND operator over here. But what if this was true? Then this will also be checked. But what if this was false? Then this will not be checked, and instead it will evaluate over here. But if this is true and this is true, and this is true, this will not be evaluated. Instead, this will be what's stored inside a target. But if this were not to be true, then hit would be stored in the target. Okay? Anyways, moving on. We're going to have to next define the distance between the object that was hit, if there was a hit object, and the origin. So fireball clone dot position minus position, which is returned by the variable that's returned by the raycast, and we're going to get the magnitude of that. Essentially, what this does is it creates. Let's wipe this out over here. Let's say excuse me while my brain is why the hell why is this why is some of this not in English? What the hell? Well, anyways, let's say the origin's over here, hit objects over here, and this vector is pointing within in this direction or something, and let's say that this vector is pointing like that. Cool. Now, if we subtract the origin, which is this, by the vector 3, which is the vector 3 position of the target that was hit, then we will get a new vector, vector C, which points towards the target's vector. And we can use the magnitude, which is essentially a way to get the length of the vector, and we can use that as the distance between vector A and vector B. You'll see why we need this later. But for now, we're going to define the velocity of the fireball to be fireball clone dot cframe dot look vector times distance. Oops, forgot to set it. And then we're gonna use both speed and distance to define time, because time equals distance divided by speed. So time equals distance divided by fireball clone dot velocity dot magnitude. Using the length, sorry, since velocity is also vector 3, if you get the length of the vector, you'll be essentially getting the speed at which the object is moving. And if you divide distance by it, you would get time. And that's what we're doing over here. We're getting speed over here. Next, what we're going to want to do is create a new tween, with the first argument being the object that we're trying to tween, the second argument being the tween info that we're using. We're going to be setting the first argument, which is to time, and we're gonna leave the rest as the default values. You can read more of that on the Dev Hub in the API reference. And third argument will be a dictionary containing the property that we want to change as the key. So the property that we want to change will be the key in the dictionary, and we're going to set the key of the of this. We're going to set the value of this key within the dictionary to a new C frame. So cframe.new I, which is fireball clone.position, yeah, and then we're going to set the look at to the position vector 3, which is so the target position vector 3, and then we're going to multiply that by a new C frame 0 0 negative distance. So basically what this does, it rotates the fireball, since we're tweening it, towards to face the object that was hit. So let's say the fireball let's just like repeat the graph up here. The fireball was pointing over here, right? And the object was over here. It would rotate the vector so it could point in the direction of vector B. That's basically what's happening, and then we're going to be multiplying by distance, so it could, so the object can move from the origin to the target by tweening. Otherwise, it would be instant if we weren't tweening. And then we're going to want to play the tween. We're going to also add the fireball clone to the debris service so it can be destroyed after the tween is done. Next, we're going to want to wait and clamp math.clamp time 1 fireball cooldown, and then we're going to have an if statement. Oops, I actually wrote statement. Hit and player. Alright, so basically what's happening over here is we're clamping the time variable to the minimum, sorry, we're clamping the time variable, yeah, I said that right, I don't know why I said sorry, to the minimum value of 1 and the maximum value of 2. If time is less than, essentially what this means is, if time is less than 1, then we will wait for 1 second. If it's more than 2, which is what we defined up here as the cooldown, it'll wait for 2 seconds. If time is in between 1 and 2, then it will wait for whatever time is in between 1 and 2. And then we're going to be checking if an object was hit and if target is indeed a player. So that means that it wasn't evaluated to the OR. And then we're going to find first child, which is a humanoid, and call the take damage method on it and damage it according to our variable up here. And then we'll return false, so we can set the debounce to false. You may be confused as to why I have the if statement over here instead of over here, because normally people put the collision detection right after the raycasting, but there is a reason as to why I did this, and I'll quickly show it to you right now. So if I just make sure everything's saved and everything is looking fine. Alright, it's gonna start a server. God damn it, I finished my water. Alright. What was I gonna show? Alright. What? Oh, my bad. I forgot to add the fireball, the actual goddamn fireball that we're trying to clone. Alright, so I already have that. I'm just gonna quickly add it. Cool. Alright, so I already have this created. Here are the properties for those who wanna just follow along, I guess. That's the property. This is the properties of the part. Here's the properties of the particle emitter, and you're gonna want to put it in replicated storage. I'm just gonna name mine Fireball Clone. You can name it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. And now I'm gonna test to see if it actually works, or if it made a stupid mistake like that again. Cool, works. But look at this. It instantly damages the player no matter how far you are away, and no matter whether the player was actually hit or not. Why is this? Well, that's because we're instantly checking if the player was hit, and raycasts are instant. They don't travel forward like sorry, they're not instant, but since we don't have any like tween or whatever that gradually increases its direction vector, it's basically instant. This would also be instant over here if we weren't using a tween. But but back to my explanation. Unlike the tween that we have over here, the raycast is instant in this case. So the raycast would deal damage before the object actually hit it. So what you want to do is you want to check if the object was hit after the wait, and you'll get this result over here, or you should get this result. If it would just work. See? As soon as it hits the player, it deals damage. Anyways, we're basically done, but first I just need to show you two more things. First, I need to show you how it looks with the network ownership on, because as I was testing, as I was showing you the wait times, you may have noticed that it was pretty jittery, the movement of the fireball. That's because the server wasn't deciding on who should own the fireball. But basically, it's much smoother now since we let the server choose who owns the parts network ownership. Now, for the last thing, if you want to have the player be able to charge the fireball and deal extra damage based on how long the player has charged it, you want to use os.time. So local start time equals os.time. And then you're going to want to pass os.time minus start time. This would get the difference between the start time and the current time. So let's say, for example, start when you pressed E, start time, which is the amount of seconds since the game, the amount of seconds that the server has been running for. Let's say when you press E, it's currently been 240 seconds since the server has started. If you and you hold you Oh no, my bad. That would be instant. You want to change this to enum.userinputState.int. Okay, so once you let go of the E key, you'll be subtracting 240 by, let's say, 6 seconds, because you've been holding it for 6 seconds. Okay? My bad. You'll be, jeez. Let's say 6 seconds have passed since you let's say 6 seconds have passed while you were holding down the key. So 240 minus sorry, 256 because it's always start time minus start time minus 240 equals 6 seconds. The player has been holding down the E key for 6 seconds, and then we're going to be passing that to the server. So let's say fireball damage multiplier, something like that. And then we can have local fireball damage, max fireball damage. And we're going to set that to something like 50. Sure. And then we're going to multiply that by math.clamp. Oh, my bad, we don't need this. Since this is math.clamp is basically, yeah, it's basically our limiter. So fireball damage multiplier, and then we're gonna set it to minimum value of 1 because we don't want the decimals to change it, and 2.5. So based on how long the player has held down the E key, it'll do either the base damage if they just pressed it, or maximum multiplier of 2.5 times. So let's say we have the damage set to 25. 25, and then it'll just multiply by 2.5. 25 by 2.5. Let me just quickly read this over to see if I made any errors. Yeah, it looks about right. Let's see. Oh shoot, wait. So let's do something like this. Print variable damage for damage multiplier. Alright, so as you can see, I'm holding down the E key and it's not firing. But as soon as I let go, I missed. As soon as I let go, it'll do much more damage. And it should be set on the server. No. Why is it no? Alright, I figured it out. It was a stupid mistake that I did. So basically, if I do this, I should be able to. Yeah. I wanted to avoid also statements because I find them kind of disgusting in my opinion, but whatever. I have to do this, or else it won't work. So I'm gonna quickly try it. Just gonna close this. Holding it for like 4 seconds. Oof, that was quite a nice amount of damage, but you can see that it does much more damage, and not killed it. Well, anyways, that's all for this very long tutorial. Well, thank you guys for watching. This was a pain in the ass, not gonna lie. I had to record this video 3 times because the first time, um, my microphone was muted. And the second time I wasn't even recording. So yeah. If the quality is worse or something, it may be because I'm just tired of explaining the same things over and over and over again. So, yeah. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. See you in a future video, hopefully.